It was the kind of morning that held still in your bones. Cool air, soft light, the smell of wet grass settling into your clothes. I remember that quiet more than anything, not because it was unusual, but because it wasn't. Everything about that day started just like the ones before it. That's what made it so easy to miss. But what I can't forget is the way his bike stood there, upright, unbothered, like it was waiting for someone who didn't plan to come back. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury, and make sure no name stays forgotten. My name's Kira Granger. I was 41 at the time, living in Everdale, Ohio, population just under 9,000. I'd worked the morning shift at our town bakery since before my son Evan was born. 5 days a week I opened before sunrise and came home by noon. It was a simple life, the kind where people waved from porches and kids rode their bikes without checking the time. Evan was 12, quiet but quick kind in that easy, unshakable way. He delivered papers every weekday before school, rain or shine, and he never once skipped a house. He said it gave him purpose, his little loop, he called it. I never had to worry. He texted me a photo each morning from the edge of the creek behind Willow Park. Just something small frost on a leaf mist on the water ducks when they passed through. That was our rhythm. He left that morning the way he always did. Gloves in his pocket satchel over his shoulder. I'd left him a granola bar and a juice box on the counter with a note. "Don't forget your smile." And wave to Mrs. Hollis. She lived 2 blocks over, always gave him a butterscotch on Fridays. That morning was cold but calm. You could hear the dogs barking down Maple Lane, but only the friendly ones. Doors creaked open, mailboxes clanged shut. I was kneading dough by 5:45. By 7, I'd restocked the croissants. By 8, I was wiping flour off the counter. That's when I realized my phone hadn't buzzed. No creek photo, no caption, no made it with a smiley face drawn in marker. I told myself maybe he forgot, maybe he was running late, but that feeling, that quiet little shift inside my chest, it didn't go away. At 10:06 a.m., I called the school. Mrs. Alcott, the front office secretary, answered like always. She checked. Evan hadn't arrived. He was marked absent. We assumed he was home sick, she said. But he wasn't. He'd left on time. Bike gone. Route started. No reason to be missing. I stood in the bakery apron, still dusted in flour, staring at my phone like it could explain something. And when it didn't, I called Darren. He's Evan's father, my ex-husband. We don't talk much unless we have to. But when he heard the tightness in my voice, he didn't ask questions. He just said, "I'll be there in 15. And as I stood there looking out the bakery window at the street we'd all known for years, I realized I couldn't name a single thing out of place. Not one thing. And that scared me more than anything. At first, it was just a missed check-in, a quiet phone. But by the time I stepped into the school office, the silence had hardened into something else. Mrs. Alcott greeted me like she always did, cheerful at first until I asked about Evan. She paused, turned to her computer, and her brow pulled together just slightly. "He's marked absent," she said, like it was nothing, like it happened all the time. But it didn't. Not with Evan. I could see the moment she realized it too, how her whole posture shifted. I told her he'd left the house on time like always. He had papers in his bag. He'd taken the shortcut behind the park. She offered to page his teacher, asked if I wanted them to make an announcement. I nodded because I couldn't find the words to say anything else. My hands felt clumsy as I stepped outside and dialed Darren. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, everything okay?" I told him what I knew, that Evan hadn't arrived, that no one had seen him, and his voice changed instantly. He said he'd be there in 15. By the time Darren pulled into the school lot, I was already sitting with the principal. A few of the staff had started asking around quietly. I remember a janitor offered me coffee. I turned him down twice before I took it just to have something warm in my hands. Darren said he'd checked the house. Evan's room was as he left it. The front porch light was off. His bike was gone. That meant he'd started his route, but he never finished it. At 11:12, the school resource officer came in young quiet with a steady voice. She asked what Evan was wearing, whether he ever took a different path, if there was a chance he'd gone to a friend's house. Darren said no. I said he always took the trail behind the park. Always. At 12:34, she came back in and said she'd found his bike near the creek. Just standing there. No scratches, no signs of trouble. Propped up under a tree like someone had planned to come back for it. I covered my mouth with both hands. Darren just stood next to me staring at the floor, his arm coming up slowly to rest on my shoulder. The officer asked for our permission to start a wider search. I nodded before I could think about what that even meant. Back across town, people were going about their day. Deliveries were being made. Soup was on the stove, curtains halfway drawn. June Hollis hadn't heard yet. She was sitting at her kitchen table scribbling notes from an old recipe book, probably deciding whether she had enough nutmeg for a pie. But something bothered her. Evan hadn't come to her porch that morning. He always did. He handed her the paper in person, smiled, accepted a butterscotch, then rang his bell on the way down the sidewalk. That morning, no knock, no smile, no bell. She set down her pen. Something wasn't right. By early evening, the town library's community room was full, folding chairs in uneven rows, old tables pushed together at the front. Chief Kelton stood near the head of the room, sleeves rolled up, voice low but clear. "We are treating this as a missing child case," she said. "No signs of distress, no struggle. But the sooner we act, the better." People shifted in their seats. Some held cookies wrapped in napkins. Others stood with their arms crossed, waiting for something solid. Kelton asked for volunteers to help search the park trails, the creek line, anywhere Evan might have passed. That's when June raised her hand. She said calmly that she was certain Evan had missed her house. She kept a morning log, had since retiring. "He always hands me the paper at 7:36, she said. "Today he didn't come." I remember turning toward her so fast my chair creaked. Darren spoke before I could. "It means something changed before the end of his route." Chief Kelton asked if June would show her the exact spot. She nodded and tucked her notebook under her arm. People split into groups after the meeting. Some brought flashlights. Others mapped out grids on the backs of flyers. I remember June walking slowly down the sidewalk, head lowered, lips tight. You could tell she hadn't planned to be part of something like this, but she couldn't sit still. She'd taught for over 30 years, and she always said kids had a rhythm. Evan had one. When it broke, she felt it. Darren and I followed the trail behind the park, the one Evan always took. We stopped at the tree where his bike had been found. It was gone now, secured in the back of a patrol car for fingerprinting, but the space still felt weighted. Flat dirt leaves barely disturbed. I told Darren he used to stop there just to listen. He nodded, said they once walked the trail in the fall, and Evan tried to name every kind of leaf. Got most of them wrong. I remember smiling for half a second. Then he said he wouldn't just leave his bike. I said no. He loved that bike. He'd saved up all summer for the green stripes he painted on the frame. Then Darren looked at me and said something I didn't expect. "He's not the type to hide," he said, "but he is the type to help someone who is." I didn't respond right away. I just looked out at the trees, trying to picture what Evan might have seen out here that we hadn't. Back at her house, June was flipping through old notebooks. Not the current one, the red one she used a few years ago. She stopped on a page from April. A short note about Evan. He'd brought her a box of candy and said someone gave it to me to give to you. He hadn't said who, just smiled and rode off. She hadn't thought much of it at the time. Kids pass things along all the time. But now she sat staring at that sentence, wondering who the candy was really from. That evening, Officer Araceli walked with June along the path behind Mr. Lorne's property. Ivy ran up the side fence. His backyard backed directly onto the trail. June said she'd seen the curtain move that morning. Not much, just a flick, and she hadn't seen him in the window, just the movement. Araceli asked if he had a gate. June said yes. Opens to the trail. Said he'd moved in about 6, maybe 7 years ago. Kept to himself. Araceli asked if he'd ever made her uncomfortable. No, June said, then added, but I wouldn't say I know him either. Araceli nodded. Sometimes what doesn't feel right is just as important as what is. Back at the temporary command post, a folding table had been turned into a whiteboard covered in notes. Names, routes, times, Evan's photo in every corner. I stared at the list of people Evan knew well. Tyler, his friend, Mrs. Alcott, Mateo from the corner store, his coach, me, Darren. But not Mr. Lorne. I said it out loud. He always waved to Mr. Lorne. Every morning, without fail. Darren looked at the board. Because I don't think Evan really knew him. Not the way he knew these people. He picked up the marker and added a name to the bottom Franklin Lorne neighbor. A few minutes later, June walked in with Tyler Hayes beside her. He looked small in his hoodie, shoulders hunched, eyes low. He said Evan had told him something. That he might not do the whole route one day. That sometimes to help somebody else you had to take a different path. Chief Kelton asked what he meant. Tyler said Evan talked about a boy in the woods, one who cried, one he told it was okay to hide if that's what felt safe. Darren asked where. Tyler pointed to the map. By the old shed, the one near the creek where the water runs deeper. That shed belonged to Mr. Lorne. Later that night, Darren and June stood just off the trail. The shed was padlocked. Ivy up one side, a crooked lantern above the door. Darren circled it slowly. No signs of entry. Lock looked newer than the rest of the building. June stared for a long time. That wasn't here last fall, she said. I remember. My niece and I cut through here. There was no lock. Darren tested the door gently. It didn't budge. We'll need a warrant, he said. June's eyes didn't leave the door. If Evan was here, she said he cleaned up after himself. Back at her kitchen table, June reopened the red notebook, the one with the candy delivery note. She traced the words with her finger. Someone gave it to me to give to you, the boy who never missed a stop, who always waved, who had started asking questions about secrets, about what's okay to keep hidden. Meanwhile, in the dark house 3 doors down, Franklin Lorne stood behind his front window. Lights off. Watching. Just watching. And outside, under the edge of a crooked tree root not far from the creek, Darren bent down and found something small. A plastic capsule. The kind from a vending machine. Inside was a folded note. This is where I wait until it's okay. The note inside that capsule didn't say much. Just a single line written in pencil, the kind of pencil Evan always kept tucked behind his ear. This is where I wait until it's okay. Darren didn't say anything right away. He just folded it gently, put it back inside, and slipped it into his jacket. We didn't bring it to the police, not yet. We weren't trying to be secretive. It just didn't feel like evidence, not the kind they'd take seriously, and by then we were already starting to notice how often they didn't. Officer Araceli was still the one doing the real legwork. She followed up on June's concern about the shed, documented the new lock, asked polite questions at doors. But everything else, the department's response stayed cautious, careful, like they didn't want to label this the wrong way. I kept hearing that phrase, "There's no indication of foul play," as if a missing 12-year-old was something you could set to the side just because he folded his clothes before he vanished. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that scarf they'd found, the red one with the blue stripes. I gave it to Evan last winter. He used to say it was soft enough to feel like a blanket. It showed up caught on a branch near the creek, just far enough from the path that you wouldn't notice unless you were looking. No footprints nearby. No drag marks. just fabric drifting in the wind. I asked Araceli if she thought it meant anything. She said it showed direction. That was all. But when I stood there with my hand pressed against the plastic evidence bag, I didn't feel direction. I felt timing, like he had passed through but not recently, like it was a marker, a place he wanted us to notice. June stayed quiet for most of the next day, but I knew she was turning things over. She'd pulled old notebooks from her shelves and was flipping through them while steeping tea. Darren stopped by that evening. He stood in her doorway and asked if she'd noticed anything unusual about Mr. Lorne in the weeks before Evan vanished. She said no, then paused. "I don't know if this matters," she said, "but he never waves. I told her Evan always did. It was part of his routine." Mr. Lorne never waved back. That had always been true. What hadn't been true until recently was that the curtain moved. That was new. We tried telling the department what we'd seen, about the tarp Darren had watched him drag down behind the ravine, about the voices someone had overheard near the shed. June even mentioned the child-sized boots she'd seen through the crack in the door when she brought him cookies. But everything got filed as unconfirmed. I understand the need for procedure. But when it's your kid, the silence starts to sound like a dismissal. The next day, Mateo, the store clerk, reached out to June, said he remembered Evan coming in the morning he disappeared, bought gum, early before sunrise. That by itself didn't raise any alarms. But Mateo said Evan wasn't alone. There was a man with him, taller, older, ball cap pulled low, maybe glasses. Didn't say much. Evan handed him a folded bill. The man handed him gum. No words exchanged. That detail stuck with me because Evan didn't need help buying gum. So, who was that man? And why had they come together? When we brought that up to the officers, they said they'd log it, look into surveillance. The store didn't have footage, but the shop next door did. It had a new camera facing the street. The footage came in later that week. It showed Evan getting off his bike at 6:58 a.m. He had his satchel across his chest. His jacket was zipped. Then the man stepped into frame. Windbreaker, hat pulled down, sunglasses. They didn't speak, just exchanged the folded bill and a pack of gum. Evan didn't look scared. He didn't look surprised. He looked like someone doing what he'd already decided to do. That's when we knew he wasn't taken. He was cooperating. Chief Kelton didn't say much when we showed her. She nodded and called it a new angle. Said they'd continue to treat it as a missing persons case, not a crime. I asked if they'd talk to Mr. Lorne again. She said they had tried. No one answered the door. No one returned the call. We kept waiting for someone to treat this like what it felt like, but all we got were promises that they were monitoring the situation. Tyler Evans' friend came forward again a day later. June had been gently checking in on him, and he finally said there was more, that Evan had told him he might one day skip his usual route, that if he did, it was because of a plan. I asked what kind of plan. Tyler said Evan once talked about a boy someone he saw crying in the woods, a boy who didn't want to be found. Evan said it was okay to hide if that's what made you feel safe. Darren asked if Evan knew this boy. Tyler shrugged. Said Evan never gave a name. Just said the kid was scared and that sometimes grown-ups don't notice what's right in front of them. That's when Tyler mentioned the shed. Said Evan pointed it out once. Said maybe it could be a good place to wait things out. He didn't say what that meant. But when we asked where, Tyler pointed at the map again. Not just the shed, but the part of the creek where it bends deeper, where the trees close in tighter, where Evan had carved his little triangle mark into the base of a tree. I remember Darren drawing his thumb across that spot on the paper, just once. No one spoke for a while after that. By the time we circled back to the house on Weller Lane, Mr. Lorne was gone. Porch light off, no car in the driveway. The curtains stayed closed. But you could still feel him there. That kind of presence doesn't just disappear, we told Araceli. She said they needed more than suspicion. They needed cause. That night, Darren and June walked the trail again slowly this time. Darren carried a flashlight, not because he expected to find anything new, but because the dark had started to feel different. At the edge of the deeper part of the creek, near the old bench Evan used to rest at, he stopped. Something was half buried in the dirt near the roots. It was round plastic scratched from weather. A capsule, the kind you get from a quarter machine outside the grocery store. Inside was a folded slip of paper just like the one he'd found before. Same handwriting, same pencil. This one said, 3 days. After that, it's not safe anymore. Darren didn't say a word. He just looked up at the trees, and for the first time he said what we were both thinking. He left us a trail. We just didn't want to believe where it was leading. After Darren found that second capsule, we stopped pretending this was something that might resolve quietly. I didn't say it out loud, but I knew the trail wasn't going cold. It was getting clearer, just in a language no one else wanted to learn. I started waking before my alarm earlier than even my bakery shift required. I'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that went untouched and stare at the corkboard I'd set up on the wall beside the fridge. It wasn't professional, just index cards and push pins, but it gave me somewhere to put the weight. Evan's morning photo prints, the 2 capsule notes, a trail map from the community center with circles where he used to stop. I wasn't looking for answers exactly. I was looking for anything that didn't fit. Anything that might explain why a boy like mine would vanish on purpose. Darren was doing the same thing in his own way. He kept retracing the trail every evening, walking it alone. Sometimes he'd send me a photo, tree markings, boot prints, nothing dramatic. Just fragments. I remember one night he came by with dirt on his jeans and didn't even realize it. Said he'd been out behind the deeper bend of the creek, the one Tyler had pointed toward. He stood in my doorway and said, "You know that Mark Evan draws that triangle?" I nodded. He said it's carved into the base of a tree near the bend, low to the ground. Not vandalism. A mark, like a signpost. I asked if anyone else had seen it. He said no. And then he added almost like a whisper. He wasn't lost. He was leaving a trail. Meanwhile, the rest of the town had started to settle back into itself. Volunteers stopped showing up in the same numbers. The school returned to a regular bell schedule. People brought over casseroles, then asked if I'd heard any updates, then slowly stopped calling. Even the police presence thinned out. Officer Araceli still followed up when she could, but the pressure from the department seemed to fade. There was no active threat, they said. No confirmed suspect. No clear evidence of a crime. I stopped expecting urgency from anyone outside our circle. That's when the doubt set in. Not about Evan, but about how much anyone else wanted the truth. June, for her part, never stopped observing. She kept her notebook close, always tucked under her arm or folded beside her teacup. I don't think she was trying to be an investigator. I think she just needed somewhere to put all the things she couldn't shake loose. She'd written down every detail she remembered about Mr. Lorne's property, how the gate opened inward, how the shed hadn't had a lock until recently, how she saw those boots by the back door. She told me one evening quietly that she'd also written down what she didn't see. It's not always what's present, she said, it's what disappears without reason. She was right. The porch light hadn't been on since the first night Evan went missing. The curtains hadn't moved since June left that tin of cookies, and no one had seen Lorne in days. That silence became its own kind of presence. We told Araceli. She said they'd attempted contact again. Still no response. No legal grounds to force entry. No warrant approved. I wanted to ask how many signs a town needed before silence became evidence, but I didn't. I just kept looking. A few nights later, Darren came by again, this time with something new. He said he'd seen Lorne. Around 11 p.m. out back near the tree line behind his property. He was moving something in a wheelbarrow, covered in a tarp. Darren didn't follow, just watched from a distance. said it wasn't large enough to be alarming by itself, but it was being moved with purpose. He didn't bury it, Darren said, just wheeled it down toward the ravine, then walked back like nothing happened. The next morning, June called Araceli and left a message, asked them to check the woods behind the property, told them to bring a crowbar if they didn't have a key. That same day, I walked through Evan's room for the first time in almost 2 weeks. The comics were still stacked by character. His school folder still tucked into the side pocket of his backpack. His pencils were lined up on the desk, every one sharpened to half length, but it was the spiral notebook beside his lamp that made me sit down. Most of the pages were sketches, silly observations, half-written jokes. But toward the back, the handwriting changed. It got smaller, tighter. One line caught my eye and wouldn't let go. If someone hurts someone but no one sees it, is it still real? I brought the notebook to Araceli that evening. She didn't say much when she read it, just nodded slowly, said it matched what she'd been hearing from Tyler, too. He'd finally told her what Evan said before he disappeared, that sometimes to help someone else you had to disappear yourself, and that the only way people would start asking questions was if they noticed who was gone, not who was hiding. Tyler said Evan gave him a kind of map, not with streets or names, just markers, a system of where to go if things got too loud. It wasn't until later that same day that Tyler didn't come home from school. His mother called the tip line just after sunset, said his backpack was gone and he hadn't answered her texts. I felt it in my stomach before we got the call. I don't know how to explain that kind of knowing. It's just quiet and complete. By the time we made it to the trail, the search teams were already out again. This time, they weren't looking for a runaway. They were looking for the path Evan had left behind. Tyler's backpack was found first, resting against a tree near the bench, same triangle carved into the bark just above it. Inside was a drawing, a pack of gum, and a pencil-written note that read, "This is where it's safe, where no one can lie when you're quiet." I remember standing there staring at the words and thinking it wasn't just a hiding place, it was a system, a plan. Evan had built something. We just didn't see it until the second kid followed the instructions. The search moved faster after that. No more loud radios or huddled shouting, just quiet groups walking in tighter lines, eyes on the ground, ears tuned to small breaks in the silence. It didn't take long. Near the deeper bend in the creek, tucked under a layer of fallen branches and a blanket pinned like a curtain, they found an opening in the dirt. Not a cave, just a dugout, shallow, child-sized. Inside, Tyler was waiting, awake, calm. He looked up and said, "You're not supposed to be here yet." He said, "Wait 3 days." Araceli crouched next to him, calm and patient. She asked where Evan was. Tyler pointed to the other side of the creek, said he was there but not for long. I stood at the top of the ridge while they brought Tyler out, wrapped in a blanket, legs swinging gently over the edge of a squad car bumper. I remember his voice when he said I wasn't running. I was just following the map. And somewhere across that water under branches we hadn't searched yet, my son was still waiting. Not for rescue, but for the moment he thought it might be safe to come home. The way Tyler described it, Evan had planned everything down to the last detail. Not just where to hide, but when to show up, who to trust, how long to wait. 3 days, no sooner. That's what stuck with me. That a 12-year-old boy had built a system with rules and structure, and another child trusted him enough to follow it. After Tyler was found, we combed the other side of the creek. Every step was quiet, not out of fear, but because it felt like we were walking into something that wasn't meant for adults. The brush got thicker near the slope where the land dipped beneath the bigger trees. Darren found him first, curled under a layer of branches and pine needles wrapped in his old sleeping bag, flashlight still on beside him. The beam had faded to a soft yellow, but it hadn't died. Evan didn't move right away. He opened his eyes slowly, like he'd been waiting in silence long enough to forget the sound of people. Then he asked, "Is it time?" At the station, they kept him in a private room. The coat they gave him was too big, and his hair was flattened on one side. He didn't look upset, just tired, worn from the inside out. I sat next to him while he sipped broth from a paper cup and picked at the seam with his thumbnail. He let me rest my hand on top of his, didn't pull away, but didn't say much either. When he did speak, it wasn't in full explanations. It came out in small pieces. Araceli sat across from us with a notepad, but she didn't press. Just let him place each thought where it fit. He said he'd seen something a few weeks before. Not an act exactly more like a moment, Mr. Lorne grabbing a boy's arm near the woods hard and fast, and the boy looked scared. Evan didn't know who he was, didn't even catch his name, but after that he started noticing little things. The same boy showing up behind the park fence. Eyes low, shoulders tight. Evan never told anyone. He said he didn't have proof, just a feeling. But that was enough for him to start leaving gum on the trail, a signal he said, so the boy would know someone was watching. Someone safe. That was when I remembered the strange question Evan had asked me the week before he disappeared. He wanted to know if keeping a secret that helped someone could still get you in trouble. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. I told him it depended on the secret. I don't think he was asking for himself. I think he was already carrying something that didn't belong to him. Later that night, I went back into his room and opened the desk drawer we kept locked when he was younger. Inside was a shoebox I hadn't seen in months. Coins, old ones mostly. Wheat pennies, worn nickels, a few foreign ones from a flea market in Cincinnati. Evan had been collecting them ever since one of our neighbors gave him a tin of spare change for helping clean out their garage. That's what he brought to the shed, we realized. Not just food or blankets, but comforts. Familiar things. A flashlight. Comic books. Coins. It wasn't just a hiding place, it was a retreat. A space someone scared could step into and feel like the world outside had stopped pressing in. Araceli returned to the shed the next morning with 2 other officers and a warrant. The door was locked same as before. She pried it open without ceremony, like she was expecting to find something worse. But what we saw wasn't chaos. It wasn't even messy. There was a mattress in the corner, carefully made. Bottled water stacked in a crate. A folded blanket still holding the shape of a child's knees. On top of a comic book, a small flashlight. Next to it, a plastic shoebox filled with coins, Evan's coins, and a notebook. Araceli read the note inside first gloved hand, steady. "If someone's not safe, you stay where they can't get hurt. I can wait until it's okay." It was all there. The entire plan spelled out without naming names. No accusations, no threats. Just quiet intention. And the boy who built it had done so not for himself, but for someone he didn't even know that well. Because he thought it was right. Later that afternoon, Kelsey, one of the patrol volunteers, flagged me down as I was leaving the station. She handed me something small and pale. Said she found it caught in a branch near the tree line behind Lorne's backyard. A piece of paper rolled tight like a scroll. I unwrapped it slowly. It was a rough sketch drawn in pencil, faint but clear. A map. Not to a location, but to a sequence. Creek, trail, triangle mark. Safe, it read under one side. Too late under the other. There was no date, no signature. But I knew Evan's handwriting. This wasn't a note to himself. It was for the boy he'd seen, the one who still hadn't come forward, the one we didn't know how to find. We gave the drawing to Araceli. She added it to the file. But the department still didn't have anything that could stick. No official complaint, no name for the other boy, no direct harm recorded. And Franklin Lorne, he still hadn't returned. His car was gone, his lights stayed off, neighbors hadn't seen him in days, no credit card activity, no forwarding address, just a locked house, curtains drawn, and a shed that no longer held its secret. The hardest part was knowing there wouldn't be a headline. No charges filed, no courtroom, just a story that would stay half-told, shared in pieces between neighbors and remembered by the ones who stayed curious long enough to care. Darren came by that night with sandwiches. We sat out on the back porch, wrapped in coats, watching the last of the daylight stretch across the school's garden beds. Evan was inside, showered and resting cartoons, murmuring low in the background. Darren said he knew what he was doing, and he waited. I didn't answer. I just reached into my pocket and ran my thumb along the folded edge of that drawing. There were still pieces missing, still things we hadn't understood yet. And one of them was a date I kept circling back to, a delivery Evan made to June's porch a few weeks before he vanished. A box of candy handed off with a smile. "Someone gave it to me," he'd said, "asked me to give it to you." June hadn't thought much of it, but now she'd gone back and looked. That box wasn't the kind you buy locally. It was a specialty brand. Not expensive, just specific. Only one store in town carried it. And it had stopped stocking them last fall because only one customer ever bought them. Franklin Lorne. We didn't have proof, but we had patterns. And sometimes patterns are the only evidence a town is willing to remember. The night before they opened the shed, Darren sat in his truck outside my house for almost 20 minutes without coming in. I saw the headlights cut across the curtains, then go dark. I didn't go out. We'd both gotten used to these small pauses between action and stillness, where something sits just heavy enough in the chest to make you hesitate. That morning, Officer Araceli arrived just after 7 with 2 colleagues and a signed warrant. They didn't knock on the front door. They went straight through the gate and across the backyard. I stood beside Darren behind the patrol tape, holding a cup of coffee I never drank. The air was cold, but not sharp. Damp, like the sky hadn't made up its mind whether to rain. The lock came off with one snap. No resistance. Just the sound of rusted metal falling onto old wood. The door creaked open like it hadn't been touched in weeks. What we found inside wasn't what I expected. No mess, no scattered tools, just a space that had been arranged with care. Intentional. Quiet. A twin mattress sat on a low wooden platform in the corner. Blankets folded neatly at the edge. A crate of snack bars and bottled water tucked alongside it. A small camping lantern hung from a nail in the wall, battery-operated. Next to it, a stack of comic books with their corners squared and a shoebox of coins, Evans coins. I could tell by the way they were grouped. Wheat pennies in one rubber-banded pile, state quarters in another. On top of the mattress, a spiral notebook with a note folded on the cover. Araceli opened it with gloves. One line. "If someone's not safe, you stay where they can't get hurt. I can wait until it's okay." We stood there for a long time, all of us. No one spoke. No one needed to. This wasn't a place someone had stumbled into. It had been made. And not for escape. For shelter. The kind a child might build for another child if he believed no one else was coming to help. After that, everything moved faster. Officers went door to door down Weller Lane, but Franklin Lorne wasn't home. His car wasn't in the driveway. No lights in the house. No movement behind the curtains. According to the neighbors, they hadn't seen him since the week Evan disappeared. One woman thought she might have heard him in the yard a few nights ago, late, around midnight. Said she didn't see anything, just the faint sound of dragging. Something heavy. When Araceli knocked on his door again, there was no answer. She left her card tucked under the door frame, the corner just visible above the mat. That afternoon, I sat on the porch at June's house while Darren paced the sidewalk. Neither of us said much at first. He looked toward the woods like he was waiting for someone to step out of them. "He built a place," I said, finally. Darren nodded. "He didn't run. He relocated." June sat beside me with her hands folded in her lap. I looked at them calm, still. Why would a boy build something like that, I asked, unless he thought he'd have to go back. Later that evening, I got the call from Tyler's mother. Her voice was tight and short, like she was holding back the panic by not saying too much. Tyler hadn't come home. His backpack was gone. His phone was off. I didn't wait. I drove straight to the trail, didn't even change shoes. The search group came together fast, officers, volunteers, neighbors. This time, no one needed convincing. This time, they knew what they were looking for. And that changed everything. Tyler's backpack was the first thing they found. It was propped up gently against a tree just past the old bench Evan used to rest at. A soft slope of dirt beside it, leaves swept clean. The triangle mark was carved low into the bark Evan's symbol. Inside the backpack was a pack of gum, a drawing, and a folded note. "This is where it's safe. Where no one can lie when you're quiet." That's what it said. Written in pencil, the lines pressed hard into the paper. Araceli read it twice. Then she signaled the search team to spread out, no radios, no shouting, just slow steps, listening. The dogs moved ahead without hesitation. It didn't take long. Near the bend in the creek where the bank dips beneath a curtain of roots, they found a small hollow. Not a full tunnel, more like a dugout shielded with branches and a blanket pinned to the side like a flap. Inside, Tyler was resting. He wasn't crying, wasn't panicked, just sitting there, legs tucked under him, a flashlight next to his knee. He looked up at the beam of light from Araceli's shoulder and said quietly, "You're not supposed to be here yet." He said, "Wait 3 days." They brought him out gently, wrapped him in a patrol blanket, let him sit on the bumper of the squad car while they checked him over. No injuries, just tired. Araceli crouched beside him and asked where Evan was. Tyler pointed across the creek. "There," he said. But not for long. I remember Darren stepping closer, his arms folded tight. Tyler looked up at him and said I wasn't running. I was just following the map. Araceli asked what map. He didn't have one on paper, but he described it. Triangle marks, tree roots, a rock shaped like a fish, and the dugout. He said Evan showed it to him weeks ago, said if anything ever happened, he should go there and wait. But only if it's bad, he added, and only if you're sure no one else will help. We searched the other side of the creek just after dusk. No wind, no birds, just the soft hush of wet leaves under boots. A flashlight caught the edge of something low and still under the brush. Evan. He was curled beneath a blanket. His eyes closed, one arm over his chest. The flashlight next to him had dimmed, but it was still glowing faintly. Araceli stepped in first, knelt beside him, touched his shoulder. He stirred like someone waking from a nap he meant to end hours ago. Sat up slowly, looked around. And then he asked, "Is it time?" He didn't cry. He didn't ask questions. He stood with help, walked without protest. And when we got back to the station, he sat quietly beside me while the officers ran their questions again. Not an accusation, more like cataloging. He told them the same thing he'd told Tyler, that the world gets too loud sometimes, that people stop listening when things seem small, and that some kids just need a place to go while the grown-ups catch up. I stayed with him that night, sitting on the edge of his bed while he fell asleep. His breathing slowed, evened out, like nothing had happened. But I knew better. I knew what he'd had to carry. And I knew that somewhere out there a house sat dark, and a man hadn't come home, and a question still waited with no name. The next morning, we sat in a quiet room at the station, just Evan, me, and Officer Araceli. The window blinds were drawn halfway, soft light filtering across the desk where Evan's hands stayed still in his lap. He wasn't fidgeting. He wasn't guarded, just quiet in that way that made everything he said feel heavier. Araceli gave him space. She didn't lead him with questions, just waited. And when he started speaking, It wasn't a story, it was memory measured out in fragments. He said he'd first seen the boy in the woods about 2 months earlier, alone, crouched behind the split fence where the trail curves toward the shed. Said he looked lost, but not the kind you fix with directions. Evan had watched for a moment, not wanting to scare him. Then he said something low, just enough to let the boy know he was seen. The boy didn't run. He just nodded. Evan left gum the next day as a signal, just like Tyler said. Same spot, same time. It became a routine. Silent but real. And then one morning Evan saw Mr. Lorne walking that path. Not quickly, not suspicious, just steady with a kind of watchfulness Evan hadn't noticed before. That same day, the boy didn't show up. Evan didn't know what to do with that. He didn't tell us. He didn't tell his teacher. He said the boy had never told him a name, and he didn't want to make things worse by guessing. He just knew something had shifted. So he stopped using the shed. Said it felt wrong now. Too exposed. And he started making a second plan deeper into the woods, farther from where anyone would look first. That was the space they found Tyler in, under the roots, with the curtain pinned back. Evan said he built it mostly on weekends when he told me he was riding farther into town for coin shops. The truth was he had packed away more than change. He brought snacks, a lantern, an extra flashlight, and one of Darren's old windbreakers he'd found in the basement. He didn't take everything at once, just a little each time, small enough not to notice. He said if the boy ever came back, he wanted him to have somewhere safe to wait. Araceli listened carefully. She asked if he ever saw the boy again. Evan shook his head, said he thought he might have left town. But then, a few days before he disappeared himself, Evan noticed the curtain to the shed had been replaced. Same nails, same fabric, just newer, and a padlock on the door. That's when he got nervous. He stopped going anywhere near it, stuck to the new space, the dugout. But he still didn't tell us. Said it would only work if people believed he'd vanished. That way they'd start looking at what he'd been looking at all along. Later that afternoon, Araceli had me go over anything Evan might have said in the weeks leading up to it all. I remembered little things, how he'd been quieter in the evenings, how he started carrying that old notebook again, the one he'd stopped using the year before. I said he wasn't withdrawn, just more careful, like he was trying not to disturb anything. That same notebook, it turned out, had been tucked inside the dugout when they found him, water-stained but intact. Inside, between the coin sketches and trail maps, was a single page written in heavier pencil. He's not the only one hiding it, said. I think Mr. Lorne knew, but I don't think anyone else believed him either. By the end of the week, Araceli's team had finished their second sweep of Lorne's property. House, shed, yard, nothing hidden, nothing buried, nothing to charge. The shed was empty now, the mattress gone, the coins returned. It looked like a structure waiting to be torn down, not one that had once held a child's idea of safety. Araceli documented everything, took photos, filed her report. But even she said there was no direct evidence that a crime had been committed. No named victim, no physical harm, no missing person tied to Lorne by record. Just a string of uneasy patterns, half-filled details, and 2 boys who'd managed to find their way back. June told me something that evening that stayed with me. We were sitting on her porch watching the sun move across the rooftops. She said, it's not always about proving something in court. Sometimes it's about stopping the pattern before it settles in, before silence becomes normal. I nodded, but I didn't answer. I think we both knew that what had been uncovered was bigger than one man's locked shed or one boy's secret refuge. It was about how long a town can ignore something just because it doesn't scream. 2 days later, I went into Evan's room to drop off laundry and found him sitting on the edge of his bed holding a folded envelope. He looked up and said it had come that morning, no return address. Just for Evan written across the front. Inside was a photo, blurry old, creased in the corner. It showed a backyard I didn't recognize, a tree swing, a small figure standing by a fence, and on the back, in the same pencil Evan used, was written, "This is the boy." I think he moved, but I don't know where. There was no signature, no clue how it got to our porch. I brought it to Araceli the next morning. She scanned it, logged it, and told us she'd keep it in the file. That's all we could do. Franklin Lorne never came back. His utilities were shut off within a month. The mailbox overflowed, then went empty. Neighbors said the house felt hollow even in daylight. A real estate agent came by, eventually unlocked the door, and found everything exactly as he'd left it. Bed-made dishes, rinsed curtains still closed. Nothing to suggest a rush. Nothing to suggest guilt. Just absence. But in this town, silence doesn't stay empty. It echoes, especially in the spaces kids used to walk every morning. Especially near the creek where Tyler now avoids the deeper bend. Especially for Evan, who returned to his route 2 weeks later with his satchel freshly packed and a quiet bell clipped back to the handlebars. He didn't say why, just said he wanted things to feel normal again. But on his first day back, June found a folded note tucked inside her newspaper. It was short, careful, written in the same steady block letters. "Thanks for always waving. Some people don't see what's right in front of them. You did. The house was sold by the end of the summer. Lorne never came back, never filed a forwarding address, never made contact with anyone. Not a single bank withdrawal, not a sighting, not a whisper. Just a clean severing, like he'd peeled himself out of the picture and left nothing behind but a vacuum." But that vacuum didn't stay quiet for long. Araceli filed a formal request to reopen a missing persons file from 12 years prior. It was a case out of Calhoun County, boy age 10, last seen riding his bike through a neighborhood about 3 hours south of us. The photo attached to the report wasn't recent, but when Evan saw it, he paused. Said the eyes looked familiar. Not the face, too much time had passed, but the way the eyes held still. It was enough to flag the case for further review. For once, the department didn't brush it aside. That same week, a groundskeeper out by the Northwood Trail reported a series of overturned stones in the old cemetery that borders the backwoods. Araceli and 2 other officers followed up. Most of what they found was animal disturbance burrows, tree damage. But one corner of the fence had been pried loose, and there, tucked beneath a slab of flat rock at the base of a crumbling oak, was a plastic container. Inside, a rusted house key, a small toy figurine missing an arm, and a Polaroid sealed in a sandwich bag. The photo showed 2 boys seated on what looked like the back steps of a mobile home. One of them had the same wheat blonde hair I remembered Evan sketching. The other had his face turned just enough to be unreadable. On the back of the photo was a date, June 14th, 2011, and a name scrawled faintly, Owen. I called Araceli that night. I told her about a memory Evan once shared where he described a boy who wouldn't speak out loud but could hum a tune he'd only heard once. I didn't know why that mattered then. Now it wouldn't leave my mind. She told me to keep the note. Said they'd send someone to photograph it later, but for now it wasn't admissible. No victim officially identified, no body, no statement tying Lorne directly to harm. Still, the local paper caught wind of it. By the weekend, 2 other towns had submitted leads. One from a foster parent who said she'd taken in a child with a similar story, one from a retired teacher who recognized the triangle symbol from an old school folder she'd confiscated in 2012. Nothing tied it all together, but the mood had changed. No one was laughing anymore. No one was dismissing kids as just running off. Darren came by one afternoon with a stack of clippings he'd pulled from archived town records. It included a fire report from Lorne's property back in 2009. Small shed blaze contained quickly no injuries reported, but the photo showed a structure that didn't match the current one. Smaller, older, burned at the base but still upright. Darren circled something, an object just visible through the doorframe. A cot, identical to the one found this year. Same metal legs, same tilt. I asked Evan if he remembered seeing a fire back then. He said no, but he remembered the sky turning orange just before dinner and the way the air smelled like plastic. Said Lauren had passed him on the sidewalk that night heading away from the house. Didn't wave. Didn't look up. Evan had told June about it once, but she thought he was talking about the 4th of July. It was August. Eventually, state investigators took over the wider search. Lauren's name was added to a federal watch list. A forensic team combed through every inch of the shed's wood grain, looking for DNA blood, anything to anchor the allegations. They found partial prints, mostly Evan's, a few unidentifiable. One shoe impression at the rear corner, deep in the mud, about a week old at most. It matched no one in the household, no neighbors. But it was a men's size 11 consistent with Lauren's boot record from a 2013 DMV photo. That's all they had. Araceli met me on the porch one evening long after the sun had gone down. She leaned on the rail, her arms crossed, just watching the tree line. She said the case wouldn't likely move forward unless a body turned up or someone else came forward. But then she paused. Said, "Unless something happens that puts us back on his trail." I asked if that meant waiting. She said, "Not always." So she did something I didn't expect. She asked Evan if he'd be willing to draw at every space he remembered. Not just the dugout, not just the coins or trail markers, but what he saw in the boy's eyes, in Lauren's walk, in the silence between moments. Evan didn't answer right away. But the next morning there were 3 new pages in his notebook. One showed a row of symbols etched on tree bark. One showed a handprint overlaid with the triangle, and the last showed the shed, but not the one we knew. A version older, darker, with smoke curling up from the roof and someone standing just behind the door. I don't know what will come of it. The law can only reach so far without a confession or a charge. But what I do know is that the neighborhood sees Evan differently now. Not like a kid who ran, like a kid who watched, who listened, who remembered. Tyler walks with him sometimes, but not every day. He says the trail still makes his stomach twist, especially when the wind hits a certain way and the curtain flutters on its nail. The new owners of Lauren's house tore down the shed, built a raised bed garden in its place, but in the corner where the triangle used to be carved, they left a single stone. Nothing marked. Just there. Evan doesn't speak about it much anymore. Not directly. But every once in a while, when we drive past the school or take the long route through the backwoods, he'll say something simple like, "He was trying to stay seen," or, "Not all monsters growl." And that's when I know he still hears it too. The echo of something unfinished, something waiting, something that doesn't need permission to be remembered. I still walk the trail sometimes. Not every week, not even every month. But when the air shifts, when the light gets low and the season turns, I find myself back there. The trees are taller now. Most of the path has been cleared out and the shed's been gone for over a year. You wouldn't know what used to be there unless someone told you. But that corner where the wood split, where Evan used to stop and just stare, it still feels heavy. Like the ground remembers. They never found Lauren. No sightings, no digital trace. The missing boy from Calhoun County. Owen was officially listed as presumed dead after investigators matched an old scar from a childhood accident to a story Evan recalled from one of his drawings. There wasn't enough to press charges without a body, but that family finally got a name to bury. I wrote them a letter just to say we remembered him too, that he wasn't forgotten here. Tyler's family moved 3 streets over. He and Evan still talk, but their friendship is quieter now. Less about biking through town, more about sketchbooks and shared silences. Evan doesn't like crowds. Loud noises make him flinch. But he started joining me at the bakery in the mornings, learning how to fold the dough, how to feel when something's done not just by the clock, but by the way it smells, the weight of it in your hands. It's been our quiet rhythm. No pressure. No schedule. Just two people standing shoulder to shoulder, letting the world soften a little. Darren came to Evan's last school assembly before the break. He didn't make a scene, just sat in the back and stayed after long enough to shake Evan's hand. I didn't expect that. But it meant something to both of us, I think. Not because it fixed anything, but because it showed up. There's still a file open, a drawer somewhere with a red tab and a label that says unresolved. I've come to terms with the fact that it might always be that way. But what I do know is this: when a child says they saw something, when they whisper instead of shout, when they sit alone looking at a wall no one else sees, listen. You don't need to understand it. You just need to make space for it. That might be the only way we ever pull the truth out into the light. Sometimes I still hear it. The low creak of that shed door in the wind. The snap of a twig too close behind. A boy's voice saying nothing but meaning everything. And when that happens, I don't try to push it away. I just stand still and remember, because the echo doesn't always fade. Sometimes it stays just quiet enough to live with. If this story stayed with you, consider sharing it so no name, no scar, and no silence gets left behind.